Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I have Jessica with me, and Jessica Foster is an incredible SEO and content creator, also on YouTube. So check out her YouTube channel. Uh, and Jessica, I met you at Chiang Mai SEO conference last year. And I found you very vibrant, very energetic, and very fun. So I'm really glad that you joined our show to share your expertise in content. So, hi, Jessica. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm glad you think I'm vibrant. Hopefully I am this morning. I haven't had my coffee yet. But yeah, it was great meeting you at the Chiang Mai conference as well and all the lovely women in SEO that were there. I guess just like in terms of background, I used to run a content marketing agency called Keys and Copy. So most people associate me with that, but I've recently rebranded to the Web Edit. We do content marketing and web design. So if you go to my new website, you'll see that it's still a little bit of a work in progress, but I'm in the process of transitioning from Keys and Copy to the Web Edit.
Yeah, yeah. And why did you decide to rebrand completely?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it was more of like a personal aspect to me of like maturing in the space and wanting to expand more in terms of web design. And I felt like the branding for the web edit was a little bit more elevated than it was for Keys and Copy. So I don't know. I think it was time to sort of grow up in the agency. And also with my move to New York, it's kind of a different aesthetic. And I was getting outside of the sort of typical marketing aesthetic and trying to go for something a little bit more like editorial. So yeah, that was kind of the move. It's more personal, I think, than professional.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Today we're gonna talk about content and content creation. And briefly you mentioned about AI content in the Chiang Mai SEO meetups. I'd like to know your take on it. What do you think about creating content with AI? I mean, now Google is completely like just flipped, and now Google itself generating AI content for us. What do you think? Are you for it, against it, or you don't mind? You use it for your
Yeah,
advantage.
I think I have there's a lot of interesting conversations happening around AI and AI content for sure. What's interesting to me, and I talked about this recently, like on Facebook, was the positioning of certain brands that are explicitly not using AI as a differentiator. So many users, I think, not all of them, and maybe not even the majority, but a portion of them are a little bit jaded by the use of AI content. So they're actually attracted to brands that claim not to use it. So Dove is an example that says they're not going to use AI generated models in their advertisements. So something like that might appeal to a certain set of users. So I think that's really interesting because it's maybe not like explicitly, oh, we're AI purists, like there's no world in which we would use AI, but in like certain types of areas, and then that being the brand differentiator. So that's really something interesting that I've been looking into. But as for myself and for my company, so for the web edit, of course, we're doing a lot in terms of content creation. To keep up with the volume of that, there is some aspect of AI used in terms of like processes, SOPs, outlines, and things like that. So I'm not adamantly against AI content, but I have yet to find, and my background is in copywriting. So I've yet to find an AI content tool that really puts out the quality that hits my standards in terms of the readability of the content and like the storytelling and things like that. But the framework that it can provide and like the research and things is really helpful. So when I'm working with my writers, I might use it to generate an outline. I've used it for sure to like generate SOPs on like, here's how to conduct SEO research for content purposes. And then I like to use it a lot for templates. So like say, for example, I'm writing an article about email marketing and I'm like, provide an example of an email marketing template that like someone might use. I don't want to like manually type out the whole template. Like it's a
Of
template.
course, yeah.
So something like that. I do sometimes use it for audience profiles sparingly. So if I have information that I've gotten through my own market research, I'll feed that into the AI and then it might generate sort of like, here's your ideal client avatar sort of thing. But for the most part, I don't use it for the content writing itself. Um, I just not seen quite the quality that I, not to like toot my own horn, but like that my writers and I have been able to produce. And that shows up in terms of rankings, but also like the performance and conversions and engagement and stuff like that. So I'm not going to say there's not a world that there is great copywriting done by AI, but it's just not something I leverage too
Yeah,
much
yeah,
in
yeah.
that sense. So, yeah, there's so much to say about AI. So
Oh yeah,
give me
100%. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I recently was thinking about like how AI shifted the requirement for people to even enter companies so right now, as a marketing kind of manager or leader within a company, I'm thinking like, okay, who should I hire? And what are the expectations I want from, for example, an intern? And I'm like, wow, AI had done so much for me already. So now my expectation of, for example, an intern or a junior is like so much higher. Of course, it's not related to copywriting, but at the same time, it's kind of related to AI, where this whole this tool that had already have all the knowledge, not so polished, but it had more knowledge than most of us, can spit out like a lot of already like research topics or as you said, emails, or in my cases, even titles for thumbnails and all those little things.
Mhm.
It's kind
Yeah,
of
and
dangerous. I would hate to be, I don't know, 20 or 19 again. I don't know.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about this a lot because like this, like a subset of my audience is writers that like want to break into copywriting and things like that. So that's kind of like the basis of my educational content on YouTube. And I've mentored writers, and the ones that do well, of course, know how to use AI, but sometimes like the differentiator for them is that they don't. And I have a lot of clients that explicitly don't want people using AI for whatever reason. But there's enough of a market out there for people who, you know, businesses that don't want AI being used for better or worse. But I think like some writers can talk about the fact that, you know, whatever value that they bring to the market is still marketable if they know how to sort of brand themselves in the right way. So I've seen it on all different sides, right? There's a copywriter that I follow who like she's an expert at generate using AI to her advantage, and talks very explicitly about that. But then there's others that are like really maybe against AI, but like people will choose to work with them for that reason. You know, so I do some ghostwriting, for example. My clients would not want me using AI. I've talked to them about it because there's so much nuance that's sort of lost in that than me like understanding their story and exactly how they talk, and you know they don't ever want to get like called out for using AI in their content. So there's a lot of different scenarios that come up. I'm not like explicit, you know, one way or the other.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so yeah, and
Yeah.
most people probably aren't. So
Yes, I think we're still lucky to be in this like gray phase where it's not explicitly super bad. I can see it going super bad in the future, like it's really harmful. But I can see it in like a very positive way too. So I know you are also really expert and great at processes, which is super helpful for more service-based companies, since the whole company is based on a great SOP. So my question is like, you've shared that you have a 6-step process here, how you create high converting content. Would you like to share with us briefly what those 6 steps are and how people can get started?
yeah, I mean, it's going to be very brief because
Sure.
like each of these involves its own sort of sub process. But the first step is in audience research, and this is something that I didn't like myself come up with. There's an expert copywriter, Tori Reed, who is really great at doing market research and kind of the specific questions that you might ask your audience. So for clients, I try to do this on their behalf as best as possible. For brands, they can do this of their own accord or hire like a market research agency. But for the most part, it's getting a sense of like what makes your audience tick, right? So that thread is going to need to be through all of your content. And the example I like to use is for keys and copy, like the headline was like SEO content or engaging content with an SEO edge. And the reason why I use engagement instead of like high ranking or high converting is because when I did my market research, the vast majority of the people I surveyed said that they were looking for engaging content. So they didn't want just like formulaic SEO content. So, every time that I talk about SEO content writing, I try to like frame it up in the way of like, this is how you write engaging content, right? So, that's just like a small example, but like it has skyrocketed the performance of my content to like make sure everything is tied into sort of those values in a sense. So the first step is kind of doing that in some way, whether you're surveying your audience in terms of like, what are the challenges that you're facing? What are the different solutions that you've tried? Of those solutions, what were your issues with those solutions? And then kind of like, and I recommend surveying at least 10 people so you can get some sort of consensus on how they talk about the service that you offer, and then use their own terminology in your content. So that is like a critical aspect that starts at the very beginning. And I see that most brands like completely skip this step because it's inconvenient. It's kind of like awkward because you're going to be talking to your audience and things like that. But it's so important. And I see this as being like a big difference maker, which is why I do it for my clients to the extent that I can, depending on how big the project is. So, there's tons of resources that I have published, as well as Tori Reed and others have published about market research that can kind of like walk you through that. So the next step is topic ideation, just like my favorite part. And this starts before SEO. Obviously, being an SEO strategist, it's like heavily influenced by SEO. But like once I have some feedback from the audience on what they're looking for, I'll use that to kind of like do a brain dump of what possible topics we might cover and in what way. I still kind of like adhere to like the pillar and or hub and spoke type of structure in terms of like what are the primary categories that we want to write about, and then what are the long tail, so to speak, of like topics that we want to cover. And that's true for whether you're doing a website and a blog or social media. So like for you, my YouTube channel, for example, I have pillars and spokes. It's not a good representation of that right now because I've like axed a lot of the content that was there. But this is more like driven by that, and it's like a creative activity, so to speak. So then, as SEO strategists, or not everyone on this podcast will be, but like leveraging SEO tools to kind of then validate those ideas. Are there people actually searching for those things, and in what volume? If you're doing this for your website and blog, certainly that makes a lot of sense. YouTube, there's an SEO aspect as well. But for social, it gets a little bit more complicated. Email, it gets a little bit more complicated. But for the most part, I like to do kind of like this brain dump activity of topics and obviously record them. So I live in spreadsheets. So that's where most of the topic ideas live. And then the associated keyword with those. So that's the second step. The third is SEO insights, and sometimes I slot in sort of like social insights depending on the type of content. So, using SEMrush or Ahrefs to validate how many people are searching for a keyword, or using like social listening tools to get a sense of how people are talking about a particular topic. And, like as a creative person, it's really hard to like, okay, tactically, like this is how that looks, but it is really kind of like a discovery process. Which is why there's only so much to cover in this one conversation.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it is something that I talk about a lot, and like, what are the tools that you would use to investigate these different aspects that then would make your content better? And I'm looking at my notes, of course, because I can never remember anything off the top of my head. And so the fourth step is really like the outline. And this is probably like my second most favorite step, because it happens before any content gets written. And so what I see a lot is, agencies or brands working with content writers, and then they go in and optimize the content after the fact. And that's like, in my mind, the wrong way to do it. I spend a lot of time on the outlines, and a portion of that is, am I ticking all the boxes in terms of what would be maybe objectively valuable in this piece of content? And then am I doing like a competitor analysis to see what other brands are talking about. And then am I analyzing in an SEO sense, what needs to be included in there, and then giving that direction to the writer to follow through on, because I want to give them as much of a infrastructure to follow as possible, and like feed them with like the sources cited and like the research and stuff, so they don't need to do a deep dive as much. I mean, they can, of course, like the great writers always do, but that's like a very important aspect, and it's something that again is like easier to follow if you're seeing like the framework that I would use. But I would say like more time is actually spent at this stage than the content writing itself. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I definitely need to impress on that. And they don't always look the same, but I do have kind of like anyone who's worked with me and has seen my outlines or be like, oh, that's Jessica's outline, because it looks very similar. But they're not identical. So this is important because when we're talking about volume, like one of the clients that we worked with in the past was FreshBooks. We did like a huge high volume content project where I was working with like 6 writers at a given time. And I was like creating all the outlines along with our project manager. So like, and those are for like 2,000, 3,000 word pieces of content. And like they had to have all these like different SEO interweavings in them. And so being able to kind of like do that at a pretty massive scale was important. But like once you get that system down, it becomes so much easier. So, and your content better, obviously. So for that one, don't quote me because the case study is on my website, but there was a pretty significant lift in conversions on those web pages that we were optimizing. They got a pretty significant increase in organic traffic for the pages that we posted. And so Steve Toth at the time was working at FreshBooks.
I was gonna ask. I was like, this project, I heard about this before. So I did interview Steve Todd on my Aspiring CMO podcast, and he was talking about exactly this case study. Was it the one where you guys got 50K traffic all of a sudden?
I mean, again, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that probably sounds right. Like he was saying, like, we were ranking at the top 3 of the SERPs for almost every page that was getting published. So that was probably that project. I'm not certain though, so I would have to ask him. But yeah, it was a pretty high volume content project, and like they were at the time were trying to drive downloads, so they got a lot of downloads. And so that was like over the course of like 8 months of work. So the outline was a critical part of that. I do like using Surfer SEO for that in a sense. Like I kind of use their recommendations for H2s and things, but I don't like, rarely will I use like a SEMrush content editor or like Surfer to just like spit out an outline and use it.
I'm so skeptical about that as well. I've been I had experience using Phrase a lot as well. But the cool benefit with Phrase is that you can just pull the headers of other competitors, but again, you don't want to fully copy them. But yeah, like but even some of these like AI generated outlines and stuff, they all look the same. Like,
and
it's just all AI.
It's not what I want, or like when I tell a writer, like, oh, give a nod to this type of headline. Maybe it's like, what is SEO? But like, we do want to cover that as a topic, but maybe it doesn't need to be the first H2. Like, I do want to think about like how someone realistically would like read and scan the content. And like the H2s aren't always for SEO purposes. Like there might be a call out for an example or like a story that you weave into it that makes your content more unique. So like I don't see that like just how it comes out being like the ideal way to use it. I guess the exception to that sometimes is like local SEO type pages. I've seen that like work a little bit better if I'm using it, because it's like it is more formulaic and there's only so much.
Exactly.
Like, so many creative ways you can talk about like pest control in Chicago. Like so I mean there's like different use cases for things. So the first step, which shouldn't be surprising to anyone, is like the quality writing. It's obviously really hard to kind of explain what quality means in that sense. I've worked with dozens of writers, maybe not hundreds, but definitely dozens of writers where like what I'm not looking for is someone who's like strict adherent to grammar rules or strict adherence to SEO. It's more like their ability to like weave words in a way that's like really interesting and kind of depending on the brand, like talks in a way that someone else would talk or would read in the voice of that brand. So it's really hard to explain how to find those people, but like once you do, you kind of know based on like their writing examples and things like that. And like there's a couple, like a handful of writers that on any project they can really showcase the voice of the brand, and it doesn't matter if it's like a SaaS company or like a med spa or whatever, they'll like figure it out. So it is really important because many of us have read like very boilerplate generic content and we're like, it could be better. And many of us have read things that are really impactful. And the difference is not the SEO outline. It's not the keywords that are in there. It's probably the person writing the content and their experience or their ability to research things. And so outside of that, right, like finding a quality writer or improving your own writing skills, I would say, and this is kind of like to one of the other questions that we probably would discuss is like trends, is storytelling, which is kind of a buzzword right now because people are like, how do you balance AI content and humans, storytelling and authenticity? And I do think it's like, it's not the matter of just telling a story. It's telling a story that like comes from the brand or it comes from the individual writing the content. That's like, this is why this matters because it relates to my experience. Or this is why it matters because there's a case study that demonstrates it. Or this is why it matters because this is the outcome that it can get for clients. So I feel like a lot of times people use AI content and they're like, tell a story that relates to this, but it's not a real story. And people can sense that, or it's really generic. It's missing like that piece that's like, oh no, this actually really happened. And I saw this the other day, like someone posted a social media post and everyone's like, did AI write this? Like, this doesn't sound like a real story. So, I mean, I think people can pick up on it. So, like when I'm doing writing for clients, I do get a sense of their brand and their history and like what their family life might look like if I'm doing it for an individual. So I'm like, no, this is actually a story that happened or realistically could have happened, and I'm writing it. AI is not writing it. So when I say storytelling, that's what I mean. I don't mean like a story for the sake of a story, but an actual experience that happened. And there's another thing that I wanted to say about that. Oh, like vulnerability. So I think that's also
I have
something.
such a hard time with that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like I can't. I don't know why. I get just, even though I'm extroverted person, I'm very happy to share like stories and stuff, but somehow on the internet I cannot put it out there like, oh, I'm having mental health issues. Like I don't have that balls yet. So to be vulnerable,
That's fine. I
I
think
literally don't have the balls.
I was going to say about vulnerability because I also don't really talk about that stuff. I talk about the things I'm comfortable talking about, but vulnerability more so means like, are you showing a part of yourself in the story, or are you distancing yourself from the story and be like, this is something that like kind of happened, but like you're not alluding to your investment in it. So like, I'm not going to talk ad nauseum about my mental health issues, but I might talk about like my story from like wanting to be a digital nomad and kind of like exploring the opportunity to work remotely and what that looked like for me. And then how I transitioned to being like a copywriter and learning SEO. So like there is some vulnerability there, but I'm not saying like, oh, I was on a cot crying every night in Thailand or something. You know what I mean? Like there's a scale. Like I don't mean everyone needs to bare their soul, but I think sometimes people don't go far enough. And they kind of like have this sterile story of like, well, this sounds like a good example for marketing. It's like, yeah, but people are not going to like connect with that. Like, how did you get there from your own experience? And someone who does this really well, I think, is Jason Hennessy, because he talks about like his struggle, so to speak, and growing his agency from where it was. He talks about like the monetary aspect, of course. He talks about like the time commitment that he was making to his business versus his family. And so we don't know everything about him, but we know enough to be like, okay, he's not just a marketer. There's like some interweavings of his life into that. And I think that resonates really well with people.
Yeah.
And we're kind of talking about personal brands, of course, and like service businesses a little bit different. You can talk about case studies and client stories and things, or for brands using like user generated content and stuff. So, just for the sake of time, I want to make sure I touch on the last one. So the last one is, of course, like the CTAs. So how do you get people to take action on the content? If you've started with market research and audience research, which you should, and people skip this and they're like, I don't need it. I'm like, you do need it, because once you get to the last step, this is where it comes in. So like, what are the things that people are looking for when they're searching for a solution like yours? That, like, what is the language they're using on what action they would realistically take? So like, are they interested in something like a newsletter? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're looking for like free resources in another way. Maybe they're looking for like a video. I can't tell you that on this, podcast to say exactly what the CTA should be, but like the market research will help tell you that, so that when you're producing content, you know exactly what to say, where to say it, how to say it, and that is what drives the action. So, for example, FreshBooks, like the purposes of this page was getting like the invoice templates like downloaded and things like that. We didn't do market research, but if I had done market research for that, which is, it's difficult to do for a brand that big, they probably do their own, but it's like, what is the outcome that someone's looking for when they use a template? They don't want a template for the sake of a template. Maybe they're wanting to save time on their bookkeeping. So like a call to action would be like, looking to save time on your small business invoicing, like right? Instead of like some businesses just say like, download the template here, who cares? Right? So like, when I do this for clients and content marketing, we do get a sense of like what's actually going to be the most impactful and where do we place the CTA. And then there's of course like the user experience component of it, or UI, which have you, that like this is the thread that carries through all of the content. So I wish I could get more specific about what this looks like, but make sure you're not just throwing in a CTA for the sake of a CTA, but like actually using the verbiage your audience is using when they're like looking for the next step, and really like selling that into them and making it easy for them to do that. Like, so some of the stuff that I do with SEO strategists is like, is the path to purchase streamlined? Like I had a client the other day where they had 3 contact pages. One was a contact page, one was a consultation page, and one was a link to their Google Calendar to book a consultation. And I'm like, people don't know where to go, or they go somewhere and they like fill out the form twice or whatever. Like, let's pick one place. We'll make it super clear what action you want to take, super clear what the outcome is going to be after they take that step. So like, that's also part of it, is probably, we want to call it UX, also navigation. So it's kind of a whole picture.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm really thankful how you elaborately explained and provided examples for us, specifically with the template. Because with companies like FreshBook, yes, like it's a very simple page to like describe like this is a invoice for, I don't know, freelancers or I don't know, whatever, small business owners. The content can look similar, but if you think about the target audience, now the CTA for a freelancer would be different than a CTA for an agency
for sure.
person.
They have different needs,
Right.
even though the template is ultimately the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, another client we did this for was Forever 21, and they have like, I think millions, if not tens of thousands, but perhaps millions of SKUs on their website. And their content was kind of like just, their PDPs were just like really basic. But we're like, okay, someone's buying like a summer dress. Like their needs are very different from someone who's buying a formal dress. So like the way that we talk about this is different, even though it's like a product description. You're like selling in like the sentiment of like, you want to look youthful and like have fun and frilly or whatever in your summer dress versus like you want an elegant night out. And I think sometimes for SEO purposes, people just kind of like spit out whatever keywords and like description needs to be done for like a PDP, or whatever page. And they miss that, like those nuances. I'm like, someone's not going to buy this just because it's like 100% cotton. they're going to buy it because like they're embodying who that person is that's wearing the dress. So, yeah, that was another project. We did this at like a massive scale. That was more copywriting and SEO. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds more like copywriting than SEO than anything, because to write in an engaging way, targeted to an ICP, that's more sounds more copywriting to me. SEOs really now they especially focus on different levels of keywords and like how Google would crawl the site. That's a very different way. My comment to this though is like I hate when SEOs cannot give me like an example of good content they like an actual good content. But they because I was in your shoes too, was to manage writers, hire them and just get the content written, and then constantly I would hit the roadblocks like, oh, but this content is not good. I'm like, okay, show me a good content. Like literally, like if you think this is crap, because like at this point I've been reiterating the quality checking the content with the writer like at least 2-3 times. I'm like, now I'm wasting the writer's time, my time, and this SEO is just like saying no. So I'm like, screenshot me an article. Like just don't even send the links. I don't care. Just screenshot that specific paragraph and tell me why do you think it's good. And they couldn't get an answer.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think, like there's a lot of SEO professionals that will like stand by this and they have their own research and case studies. So I'm not going to say that they're wrong, that like formulaic content can work. I mean, I've seen it work, but I think in terms of ranking, but in terms of like driving conversions and engagement and building a community online and like all of the awesome things that can happen from good content, I think even your SEO content needs to have an aspect of copywriting in it. And I will
Yeah.
stand by that because that's what's going to make the difference now in 2025 and perhaps going forward is like, if AI content is used by anyone, like how are you going to stand out with that?
Correct.
That's a question for everyone. It's something that I'm still exploring as well. But in my history, seeing how copywriting has been so impactful for the SEO content, I'm like, it still works. Like I have the case studies that show that it works. There's yet to be a day where it hasn't worked. So like, I'm always open to be proven wrong. That's not a challenge for anyone here, but like, I think it's something people are talking about. It's what gets people interested in the brand and like nurtures that loyalty. So I do think it's something to think about if you're going to be using AI content or writing content for SEO purposes. Like, is ranking and traffic the end goal? Most of the time it's not. Unless you're doing just like AdSense. Like, what are you going to do with that traffic? Where do you want them to go? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that kind of answers my last question is like, how do you think content would be different in 2025? Well, one of the aspects, as you mentioned, is the personalization, the branding, brand voice. But also I'm seeing a big trend of digital PR as well and a heavy focus on external backlinks. Because ultimately, if you want to stand out in this like giant ocean of the internet, like what do you think anyway about link building? Like,
Yeah, so
some
it's funny
people
you say
don't.
that
Yeah.
because I moonline as like an online reputation management specialist. So I do like sales, but like we have a lot of clients that need like online reputation management and PR. So like it's so funny because sometimes like the old school SEO methods like still work for aspects of online reputation management. Like if you're doing like suppression of negative results and things like that. But like we are doing a lot in terms of like helping create like a buzz with like positive press that helps clients then earn media, and then that can help them get like a Wikipedia page that and down the line can help them get the knowledge panel. So like, I mean, it's happening for like significant figures mostly, but like when someone Googles your name and you have essentially this like firewall of like positive content that like keeps your competitors out of the space and like gives a really solid impression of who you are, and you have like a lot of positive news outlets, like that's worth gold, at least for a personal brand. For like companies and things like that, it's a little bit more difficult. You're probably doing more like traditional PR rather than like thought leadership content. But this is something I'm seeing a lot. It's not something I thought to talk about today, but it is for sure like becoming more prevalent in the spaces that I'm in. And then I think the other aspect is like creating your space online. So, I mean, Facebook groups were hot for a while. I think in some sense, like people will like own this Facebook group as a community, or they have like a YouTube channel, or they blog or a newsletter. Whereas like, I think, you know, in the time of Gary Vee, like getting out as much content as possible is in many places, like people get burnt out with that. So like, how do you nurture your fans in like maybe one or two corners of the internet? And those are the people who are going to be buying from you again and again. So I think that is kind of like coming back in a sense of like, maybe you don't have to be everywhere at once. It might not be sustainable to, like most brands don't have the resources to, but like doing one or two channels like really, really well and getting like into the, I don't know, pit. Like, that sounds negative, but like with your community and like understanding what they need is going to like make you a better marketer, I think. So that's, I don't know if that's a trend, but it is kind of like how the pendulum swings, right? I think everyone's
I just see that SEOs are just becoming overall digital marketers at the end of the day. Like I see how SEOs are pivoting to other things, but ultimately they will be involved in more than just SEO. I mean, most agencies are doing like technical SEO, web design, web development, as well as SEO, and then some of them also combine with content writing. So I just see that SEOs are just becoming hopefully like CMOs at the end. So where they have an overview of all the channels, not just like one specific organic traffic source.
Right.
Yeah.
Like where all those pieces are coming in together, which is part of the reason why I started offering web design was because like I would be working with partner agencies, or I'm working like relaying input to the client's developer team. And I'm like, you know, all of the improvements I want to make, I like hit a wall if I don't have the access to the platform or the availability to like customize things as I want. So now it's kind of a requirement that a client has like a fully optimized platform, or like otherwise we do a website redesign so we can like build it foundationally the right way instead of trying to like tack on SEO and UX improvements all over the place. So that kind of like came out of necessity because, you know, there was just some things I couldn't affect if the client held the keys to doing that or their agency did. So yeah, in that sense, like I've expanded the service ever so slightly in that way to include it, but I've kind of pulled back on doing like multi-channel content marketing because it's
too much. Yeah. It's too much.
It's a lot. And I think
a lot.
there is something to say to be like a specialist.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. For you, for example, I could see like fractional CMO as well as a role where it could like you have an overview of everything, but you don't execute them all, so it's less overwhelming as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of job postings for like, I don't know what the titles would be, but like content marketing strategists, or I mean, even like once you read the job description, it sounds more general, but what they want is like someone who's going to orchestrate the larger strategy rather than like just do social media, just do email. Like you'll probably still have people doing the implementation of those things, but like all the pieces need to come together. Like if you're publishing a blog article that then it's going to like link to a PDF that's going to have people join your email list, and but you don't have like an email sequence to follow up, like, you know, it just gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly. Yeah.
People can get like very overwhelmed by that, which I get, but you know, if you have the time to put into like building out a larger strategy, I think it's helpful versus things just being completely siloed.
Yes. Yes. Amazing. Well, Jessica, we are coming to the end of the show, but before I let you go, where can people find you, and what are the resources you would recommend people to check out?
Yeah, so my website is thewebedit.co. It's, like I said, a little under development, so there's not a ton of like educational content posted there yet. But my YouTube channel is also the Web Edit. There's some content there in regards to SEO content writing. My kind of subset audience is aspiring freelance writers and copywriters. So there's some educational content there. But if you really want my like articles in terms of like content strategy, copywriting, things like that, then I would go to Search Engine Land, Search Engine Journal, and Marketing Land for now, because I have a lot of content there that I've posted over the years, and I try to be very in depth with it. So it kind of talks about my methodology. It talks about how to like draft content, grow content team. That's kind of like all that I talk about in those spaces. But of course, if you have any questions, you can add me on LinkedIn. Sometimes I post there as well. So yeah, well, it's great to be here on your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I hope to see you at the other events as well.
Me too.
Hey, bye.